Welcome again, everyone, to the New Hall Society International Women's Day celebration. Of course, I have to begin by saying this is a sad day because I know that we're all thinking about women in Ukraine and the images that we have seen of women giving birth in bunkers, fleeing the borders, and indeed young women fighting. And I know that we're all remembering them today. But we're here to celebrate our college alumni across the world and women across the world. Together, you are a powerful and impressive group of women, and discovering your vibrant and supportive organization has really been one of the great pleasures of this job. And then when you are joined with the brilliant young students of today, you are a significant voice for women across generations. And I need to thank you all, Tessa, and all of those who organize these events and everything that we do throughout the year. I believe that this college, as one of the few higher education institutions for women, with a unique ethos and a progressive history, should be a leading force in debate and discussion about women's issues. I decry the way that politicians and some sections of the media are controlling the debate about women's lives. If you were to believe newspapers, you would, for example, recently have thought that our main concerns were about the introduction of unisex toilets in theatres. There have been massive numbers of articles about that. Ironically, women have always been concerned about toilets in theatres, the fact that there are hardly any of them. Issues are sought out which divide women. For example, huge attention is given to whether or not trans women should be allowed into women's refuges, although I personally am not aware of a specific actual case of this arising as an issue in this country. Where there are substantive issues which actually unite women, and those should be the ones that we are examining. For example, with refugees, the issue which unites all women is the incredible shortage of refugees and the huge amounts of cuts that have been made to them. So today is part of us as women seizing control of the debate about our lives by discussing some of the subjects that really concern us: our health, our safety, and our environment. In health, which we are about to discuss first, we have come a long way in terms of reproductive rights from the time when I first went to university and was in one of the first groups who were allowed to go on the pill as single women. And there are exciting new issues being discussed, like how we get better treatment in HRT and period poverty. But we're also going to learn about all that there is still to do. I want this college to become a significant centre for discussion of girls' and young women's well-being. We have in this college a great example to others of a supportive community within a holistic environment with, for example, an amazing art collection, wonderful gardens, kitchens that people don't have in other colleges. And we are about to employ our first full-time head of well-being, and will roll out a whole new program of well-being and resilience available to all students. There is a crisis across the globe as girls are undermined by the pernicious effects of social media, and we as an institution for young women should be in the forefront of looking at how we combat that. But for now, on with the debates and our celebrations. Thank you again for coming and for joining us virtually. And do, as you watch, feel free to think of feedback ideas for how we could do this better in future. But for now, over to a woman I admire very much, who is also one of my friends, Dr. Saleyah Ahsan, to introduce our first panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. So I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to be here to kick off with a subject that is very close to my heart, and I'm sure to many of you out there. It's the area of women's health issues. But before I begin, can I just ask, am I the only one not in a jumpsuit? I didn't get the memo. I didn't get the memo. Right. I want to start by just explaining what we're going to be talking about. So our health and our choices, the risks that we have to take with the choices that we make, our lives and even our deaths. These are going to be some of the areas that we are going to delve into within the next hour. So we have come a long way in the UK and globally, but there is stacks of room for improvement. Contraception and abortion are widely available, and even recent news on HRT on how we can access it. But other places around the world may well be going in the other direction. We'll talk about Texas, Hungary and Honduras, for example. As we go into this, I want to begin by introducing my panel, who I'm delighted to have with me today. I'm going to begin with the first speaker who will kick off after I've done the introductions, and that's Ramesa Hasan. Ramesa is a fellow student at Cambridge. She's a student at Murray Edwards, and she's a US postgraduate MPhil student here studying politics and international studies with a focus on democratic theory. She's also interested in various streams of feminist political thought relating to gender and reproduction, as well as feminist perspectives on environmentalism. She's also, I don't know how you cram it all in, she's also the MCR Social Secretary, and today she does have an interest in period poverty and works in that area. And even though you're speaking about other things, I will bring some questions to you on that. But today she'll be speaking about the feminism of reproduction and motherhood. Next to Ramisa is Kate Muir. Kate is the author of Everything You Need to Know About Menopause, but We're Too Afraid to Ask. And she's also the producer of 2 Channel 4 menopause documentaries with Davina McCall. I think Kate has been such an important figure in helping bringing menopause out into the public discourse and a discussion in a way that I don't think I've seen before. She's also an activist for the Menopause charity, a writer of numerous books, 3 novels as well. One of the books I'm going to really, want to talk to you about is the book you wrote about Arms and the Woman, about the battle for female equality in the military. I'm ex-military, so yeah, I'd love to ask you further about that. Sarah is co-chair of the Abortion Support Network, which funds abortions for those who are unable to access them in their own country. She's also the CEO of Dignity in Dying, the campaign for choice at the end of life, and its sister charity, Compassion in Dying. It's a service provider that she established to support people who have to have greater control over their deaths within existing laws. And again, a very, very important area as a clinician. I see when things go horribly wrong at the end of life, and I feel that this is such an important area to get right, because you only die once and you've got to get it right. She's a passionate advocate for personal autonomy and progressive liberal reform, and has co-authored the book Last Rites, The Case for Assisted Dying. I want to kick off by inviting our esteemed panel to speak for a few minutes, and then we will have a discussion, and then I won't hog them, I'm sure. I'll open it up to the floor and you can all put your questions. We've also got an online audience, and I'll be looking at their questions as they come in. Ramisa, over to you.
Hi, I'm Ramesa. As you heard from my bio, I do a lot of political theory, and so I kind of wanted to start off with a theory-based kind of perspective and present some kind of, I guess, like existing perspectives on feminism of reproduction. And I think that this is really interesting to me because I think that a lot of these kind of concepts and components don't come up in a lot of the kind of popular discourse in feminism that I encounter in my life. Maybe that's just because I'm young and I don't talk about motherhood and reproduction that much, but I also think that some of these more critical perspectives are I guess more talked about in academic circles. So I think that it's kind of important to think about these things in a broader context, and I think that this will be a good way to spark some discussion because I'm looking forward to hearing other people's perspectives. So yeah, I'm gonna be kind of covering really quickly the connection between womanhood and ideas of womanhood to motherhood, pregnancy, periods, and our bodies in general. So starting off, motherhood is one issue that's kind of split feminist movements since the 70s, pretty much. So some feminists regard motherhood as a uniting element among women and have based a lot of their claims for the rights of women on it. But on the other hand, the issue of motherhood has also been one of the anchor points for denying women's rights and equality and for discriminating against them in the eyes of a lot of feminists. So starting from this observation, the mainstream feminist discourse, like up to the 1980s pretty much, takes a critical approach to motherhood, and it regards the rejection of motherhood as a prerequisite for overcoming women's subordination, which I think is a quite radical claim, which we'll come back to it later. But furthermore, a large body of feminist research demonstrates that this link between motherhood and nature is historically, socially, legally, politically, and philosophically constructed. So it's kind of a construction rather than a direct natural correlation, as some people believed in the past. So a lot of feminists refute the common assumption that motherhood is something that's innate to women, which I think is a perspective that that really, I guess, should be discussed further. And they show that the association of maternity with women's nature conflates biological and social motherhood and denies that motherhood is work, which gets into a lot of other issues and theories of exploitation of women's labor. But I'm not going to be able to cover that much because that's kind of a whole nother sector. But yeah, so the feminist movements of the 70s and 80s, they began arguing that the conflation of biological and social motherhood and the association of both of those forms of motherhood with nature basically creates, maintains, and legitimizes women's subordination. And thus, they insist that the distinction between, there needs to be a distinction made between biological and social motherhood, and that only making this distinction can help reveal how some of these social perceptions of motherhood are harmful. Moving on a little bit further, the radical Marxist and colonial feminist discourse links motherhood to social and economic and racial structures like patriarchy, capitalism, and colonialism. So basically, their kind of end idea is that refraining from motherhood and motherly work is a means of resistance against these systems, which I think is also a very, I guess, like kind of contentious perspective, which we can discuss further too. So moving on a little bit farther into some even more radical perspectives, which I think are really interesting. We have some radical feminist scholars such as Saleyah Firestone, who believes that pregnancy is like tyrannical to the woman's body, and that basically a way out of a lot of feminist issues like pregnancy, periods, and a lot of other things that are tying women's bodies to the idea of womanhood need to be kind of done away with, and their answer to that is technology. And so like alternative reproductive technologies, and she even mentions a really radical like external womb, which basically deconstructs our current ideas of a biological family. So yeah, I think that these are really, really interesting perspectives, and my personal kind of idea about this is that I think that if we're going to continue to conflate motherhood with womanhood, we need to kind of extend both of these definitions to have a more open and inclusive definition of like womanhood and of motherhood. And I also do have some critiques of this techno-feminist approach to solving feminist issues, because I think that a lot of these approaches are operating under the assumption, a very utopian assumption, that everyone has the same access to technology, which is not the case, and that everyone has the same kind of, I guess, social and cultural values, which also isn't true. And it kind of puts us at this divisive point in feminist thought, where we have a group saying that the only way out of women's oppression when it comes to motherhood is these really radical deconstruction of a link between womanhood and motherhood. And we also have, on the other hand, women who want to be pregnant. And I think that that's also a very valid perspective. And I think that it's a contentious point in feminism, and I think that it's really important to discuss. So that's why I kind of wanted to bring these issues to light in these perspectives so that people can think about it more.
Thank you, Ramisa. Okay, so my head is somewhere in these external
wombs,
lined up, but I'll talk about that later because you made me think of something I learned at medical school. Kate, over to you.
Well, in terms of feminism, there's not a single woman that won't go through menopause, so there is absolutely no choice there. But I'm about to talk about the choice that will be coming to us all when feminism catches up with science and science catches up with feminism. I've become a menopause campaigner really by mistake over the last 3 years, following my own car crash of a menopause, which was a sort of Thelma and Louise type car crash as my hormones went off a cliff. And I realized what I was going through, millions and millions of women were going through, and they were far less well-informed and well-connected than me. And I got my life sorted out. But at that point, I realized the information out there was shocking, and the interpretation of the science around menopause was sloppy, truly, truly sloppy. And the science around HRT and women taking it for a long time in their lives was also absolutely wrong. And it's come as a huge shock to me that, you can look into the medical establishment and go, that's incorrect. And there's a huge movement of women now coming in, talking about the menopause, and it's particularly doctors and academics. And there are going to be 1 billion menopausal women in the world in 2025, right? So we need to pay a little bit of attention to what's going to happen to them. And also that menopause, apart from your witches and crones of medieval time, menopause is really a very modern thing for us because, in Victorian times, we died at 57, right? And before that, even younger. So only now are we living on average to 83, and only now are women of 50 and 40 looking forward to 30 or 40 years of life. How are they going to live it? How are they going to live it well? How are they going to do good in that time and maybe not just sit at home in their slippers? And so it's really interesting to see what menopause is doing at this second in Britain, in a developed country, to women at work. And from what I see in researching the next documentary, which is called The Menopause Brain Drain, is that 1 in 10 women are leaving work in the period roughly between 45 and 55, according to quite a lot of polls that I've sort of put together. And that approximately a quarter of women are going part-time. And this is the moment when, you possibly don't have any more children at home, you've got time to concentrate on your career, on your intellectual life, on fun, but yet you are walking out of this job. And I was just, everything comes back to Ukraine, doesn't it? And I was thinking about those older politicians that are running our lives. We've got a 69-year-old Putin and a 79-year-old Biden, up there. And at least there's an 81-year-old Nancy Pelosi. But you know what I mean? When you look at that, or you see that those senior women have not come through. And it is sexism, but it's partly self-censorship. And it's partly us finding that in menopause, awful things happen to our brains. And it's quite true. It's physically true. It's not an imagined thing. The hot flushes are the canary in the coal mine. They're telling you your brain is panicking. And women's, as we're discovering in this documentary, to my horror, women's grey matter starts going down in perimenopause. It bottoms out. It starts coming up again after your periods stop. So there's this period of around 10 years where women's brains truly change and the connective white matter goes down. Most of us cope with it brilliantly and, pop up as Ruth Bader Ginsburg afterwards. But it is absolutely true for the people who suffer it more, and I certainly suffered memory problems, and that's why I rushed out to get HRT. For those of us who suffer it more, it's a really, really dangerous time. And if we want to keep women functioning in these next 30 years, taking political power, rising in the boardroom, just simple things like 50% of nurses are over 50. A third want to leave their jobs. You think about the cost of a loss of a 50-year-old nurse who might work till she's 65, and it's the cost of 30 years of seeing terrible things happening and amazing things happening and knowing what to do and having the confidence to handle it. You cannot replace her with a 22-year-old nurse. You can't replace that depth. And so I have sort of researched deep into HRT, and I can talk about that later. I don't want to talk for too long. But basically, the new kind of HRT, which has not been properly studied in Britain, what a surprise, but it has in France, is body identical HRT made from yams, and it's an exact copy of your molecule of estrogen, progesterone, or testosterone, all of which are female hormones. And when you put it back into your body is very, very happy to have it. And the studies show that over 5 years, it does not give you breast cancer. And on the whole, you will live longer in HRT. And the massive thing we are now learning, and I'm now researching into, is that it's preventing osteoporosis. It's helping prevent Alzheimer's and dementia. It's preventing cardiac disease. It's preventing diabetes. Basically, your body is not intended to live this long. And once our reproductive system shuts down, our kind of hormones abandon us. And the idea that we had to go on, live well, enjoy aging, yes, we can enjoy aging, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we want to age in good health. And the fact that these hormones are available to us, and they're available to us in later life, is truly life-changing for what I think women can do in the world. So.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. And interesting to listen to you, Kate. I've actually really enjoyed my menopause and feel more powerful for it. And I think that just shows that there's no one size fits all. It's about choice. And that's what I'm about, is about giving people choice. So across Dignity in Dying and Abortion Support Network, I see women prevented from having choice at the beginning and the end of life. And the forces that are at play here are replicated across their lives. And there's the patriarchy in the form of the church and the state. It's about misogyny, and it's about medical paternalism. So Margaret Atwood recently wrote in The Guardian, you may have seen her piece, and she talked about ASN's amazing volunteers. She said, women who are not allowed to make their own decisions about whether or not to give birth are, in fact, owned by the state, as the state claims the right to dictate the uses to which their bodies must be put. In the same way dying people are owned by the state takes away choice from dying people, forcing them into impossible situations. We know that people are forced abroad to travel for an assisted death, 1 a week at the moment from the UK, that some remain beyond the reach of even the best palliative care, and that others are being forced to end their lives in horrible, violent and lonely deaths in this country. Now, the parallels with backstreet abortions can't be ignored. Choices are available to those who can afford it and to those who can navigate the complicated and often bureaucratic bureaucracy, the paternalistic bureaucracy that there is. So women travel for abortions and women travel for good deaths, with the state happy to outsource women's healthcare to other countries. I'll give you an example of the intersection between medical paternalism and the church, which is around the contraceptive pill. And I didn't really know this until quite recently, but the Faculty of Sexual and Reproductive Health issued recently updated guidelines which showed that the medical advice on the contraceptive pill that recommended a 7-day break from the pill, which caused a bleed, was completely misguided. There's no medical benefits to having a bleed whatsoever. The recommendation has been in past for the last 60 years because of efforts to encourage the Catholic Church to deem the contraceptive acceptable, and also because women have not necessarily had their needs taken seriously by the medical profession. And of course, many women now still have to find a way to overcome the barriers put up by some doctors in order to access the contraceptive pill, the morning after pill, and abortion. So the mantra, my body, my choice, still depends on having a doctor who doesn't believe that they have the right to add to that statement, on my terms. And that brings me to medical gaslighting, where healthcare professionals convince somebody that they're exaggerating their symptoms or perhaps ignoring them altogether. So while anyone can be the victim of gaslighting, women have been particularly exposed to it. In 2018, again, just a couple of years ago, the Independent Medicine and Medical Devices Safety Review, the Vaginal Mesh Inquiry, you might know it better as, reviewed 3 medical scandals in which women were given medical products, but they weren't tested, and then the women that had them were not believed when they talked about their side effects. In fact, the report showed that the women's voices were consistently dismissed, and they were routinely told that they were imagining their symptoms. It talked of an arrogant culture in which serious medical complications were dismissed as women's problems, or saying this is just part of the time of life around menopause. Women are less likely to receive pain relief than men. They have to wait longer to receive pain relief, and they're more likely to be given sedatives rather than pain relief. One US study showed that women who identified as Black or Hispanic received less pain relief following childbirth than white women, while in the UK, and there's just been an inquiry announced into this, Black women are 5 times more likely to die in pregnancy than white women. We see a lot of gaslighting at the end of life as well. So a few years ago, Dignity in Dying launched an important report called The Inescapable Truth about the suffering that people do face at the end of life as they die. It shone a light on that. Nobody told me it would be like this, said someone's sister as they were dying of cancer in a hospice, but gangrene had set in her hands. Women deserve open and honest conversations about the reality of pregnancy, birth, abortion, illness, and death. And our voices should not be silenced when we speak out about the failures of the current law, medical practices, or healthcare professionals. We need to be able to make informed decisions about our lives, and for those decisions to be supported by the state and respected by medical professionals. I want to say just something, if I've got enough time, about joining these issues into history, particularly for the undergraduates that are here. The thing about social change is that, in retrospect, the transition between the past and the present seems so seamless, doesn't it? Women's suffrage, the civil rights movement, equal marriage. It's sometimes so easy to overlook the fact that women had to fight for these things to even be discussed, let alone put on the statute books. To quote Margaret Atwood again, democratic rights don't grow on trees. They must be struggled for and maintained. So change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from growing, unstoppable grassroots movements. And campaigns to promote human rights frequently interlog. I can see the parallels between what Abortion Support Network and Dignity in Dying are doing now and what's happened in history. So in mass mobilisation, where William Wilberforce said that the scale of petitioning shook the British elite, That was in 1833. And we're influencing peers right now through thousands of letters for an amendment to be tabled and debated in the House of Lords just next week. In the 60s, the then Home Secretary Roy Jenkins was a behind-the-scenes architect of all that progressive change, the decriminalisation of homosexuality, of abortion. And Baroness Molly Meacher, Dignity in Dying's chair, is doing exactly the same sort of backroom manoeuvring now for us. You're right, it does come back to Ukraine. And you'll have seen all those women, those families fleeing to Ukraine, from Ukraine to Poland after the attack. But what you need to know is that Poland has some of the most punitive laws in the Western world. It completely banned abortion very, very recently. So despite being a haven for Ukrainians, it's going to be hugely problematic in terms of women getting reproductive choice. Abortion Support Network is part of a coalition, and we are supporting those displaced people. We've put instructions on how to access the morning after pill and early abortion pills into Ukrainian and Russian. We expect people later in their pregnancy to be able to start getting in touch. Now, these are what I'm talking about now. I just want to make this final point, if I may. These are events that will become history, and making history is the job of a campaigner. And so when you've graduated, what I wanted to say to you is that I want you to consider becoming a campaigner and consider standing up for what you believe in. Winston Churchill's got a brilliant phrase. He said, so you've got enemies. Good. So you've stood up for something once in your life. And that's what I'm urging you to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to, listening to you all, and it's really, it's quite stark hearing all our challenges laid out like this. And we've had a few, haven't we? And I know for the rest of the day we'll hear about other areas, but we'll specifically think about health. It just seems to me that we've been fighting forever, haven't we? And the fight isn't, it hasn't stopped. And one thing I want to say, within medicine, and some of the points you raised, Sarah, as well, why are we still struggling for our basic health rights when we're at this stage where medical schools are half and half male and female? So what is the root cause of this?
I mean, I think it's cultural. I think it is medical paternalism, and it is rooted in...
Even when we've got so many women now who are healthcare professionals themselves, and we're half and half.
I think there's change, but I know very much from I was Director of Communications at the Equal Opportunities Commission, and the idea that change gradually filters through just as more and more women access those areas isn't true. You need positive interventions to bring that change. You really do, to kind of accelerate change over the centuries. I mean, remember, the British Medical Association has never been in the vanguard of social change. It was opposed to the National Health Service. It was opposed to the contraceptive pill. It was opposed to abortion. Until it was absolutely on the cards in the 60s, as I referred to in my speech. So I think it's really around positive interventions and people speaking out, women speaking out for what has to be different, and campaigning. I mean, I'm going to put another plug for campaigning in there, if I may. Become campaigners.
And just because we're on this point, and then I'll move on, but, being a little bit controversial, women within the health profession themselves, are they the best fighters and advocates for female patients? Maybe not always.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it actually reminds me of the women bishops. So when you get to an area or an occupation that is segregated very much by a sort of old-fashioned dogma, you haven't been allowed to be in it, then you have to conform to get into that area. So the women bishops, for example, are the last people who are going to support a change in the law for assisted dying. The Church of England is opposed to it, and they are not going to rock the boat once they're in there. But, I mean, having said that, there are little things that you can do. There are conversations that you can have. You can bring other women into the profession. You can talk positively, and you can listen to your patients. At the end of the day, what I'm trying to get rid of is trying to equalise is patient power. So it's a mindset that you don't, I mean, for years, medicine has been thought of, and it is a very, very powerful profession. So it's about thinking that your patients are equal to you and that you don't have command over them or their bodies.
Kate, how do you feel about female medical advocates in the world of menopause?
There are some absolutely fantastic ones, and there are some stuck in another century. The problem is very much at the top: who's controlling the education, who's controlling the hospitals, who's controlling the policy. And only 41% of universities teach menopause as a module because only 50% of the population get it. So why would you bother? But I mean, just, you know, for instance, there's a big NHS committee on the menopause just now. It's led by a non-doctor who is a man. And
that just makes me insanely angry.
You know, I sent him my book, but you know, but he probably won't read it. But you know, that is not helping us. And I mean, here's a super example of medical sexism that nobody understands. And so, what is women's biggest hormone? What's our primary hormone? Testosterone. You didn't know that. And well, most people, I didn't know that until a couple of years ago. It's the thing we make most. It's really powering us. What's it doing? It's doing almost exactly the same things it does in men. It's powering our brains, our energy, and also our libidos. And it too descends at menopause, not quite at the same rate, but it starts going seriously down. And basically, we do not get our own hormone back. When we go for HRT, we're offered estrogen and progesterone. We are not offered testosterone, unless we go in on our hands and knees under the 2015 NICE guidelines, which says testosterone may be offered in some extreme cases for low libido. So we've got to go in and say, I'm not serving my husband properly. I'm not giving him what he wants. My libido is low. Please, could I have a little bit of testosterone to make my relationship work? Not quite that, but you know what I mean? It is put in that way that we have to say, I am sexually inadequate. Please help me. And in fact, we've started doing tests on testosterone, and they've done some in Australia as well. And it has a huge effect on women's mental health and energy and ability to exercise and ability to keep their muscles up. And it does not grow you a moustache, because at 40, you know, you can have testosterone at 40. I take testosterone. I had the same testosterone I had at 40. It just makes me energetic and normal. My daughter, who's 22, has double the testosterone I have. And so here's a great big subject, absolutely uncovered, ignored by the medical establishment in Britain. But it's our hormone, and why aren't, you know, I'd be doing a PhD in that tomorrow, if anyone.
Yeah, but you know, we're hearing about, you know, the testosterone from, my brother is a pharmacist, and he's running testosterone clinics for men. But you're right, you know, why aren't we offering, is it our messaging? What, you know, what's going on? Why isn't this getting out there?
Because nobody informs on it, and it's really not been properly written about, talked about, debated in places like this. And this is where we start it kind of going out into the world. And, you know, it will change. I mean, even in the last, you know, year or two, this menopause debate I've been involved in has completely changed. And it's amazing what's coming out of Britain. I mean, I was over in America last week interviewing menopause specialists, and they're like, you're way ahead. You've got all this going. You can actually get HRT in Britain. Whereas in America, if you're insured, you might get it a bit, but, you know, it's going to cost you $600 every 3 months. I mean, it's just, you know, basically, you know, it seems to be in terms of menopause, in terms of HRT, particularly if you're Black, you're poor, you're Asian, you're Latinx in America, you ain't going to get HRT. There's a real class, race, economic divide on the access to this wonderful thing in health that is going to make a difference to your long-term health. It's the same in Britain, but at least we have the NHS, and at least we can inform people and get them in there. In America, there are, and you know, the rest of the world, there are these incredible barriers to women looking after their long-term health.
I want to go to the other end from menopause to periods. And Ramisa, I know that I want to speak to you about other things, but I have to ask you about period poverty and your work in that area, and where the high and mighty SDGs, you know, their hopes and plans for them. Are we going to meet them?
I think that in this situation, there's like a lot of, as we've seen like in other fields, like barriers to who has like access. And I think that it really depends on what kind of social movements are arising in the areas that we're talking about.
I have to say, I was pretty excited when I went. I'm at Magdalen, and for the first time in my life, I was stuck for choice with all the sanitary products that were laid out in the loos. I thought, my God, in the library, this is brilliant. Never seen that before anywhere else. Does it exist anywhere else? I don't know. We have any sort of sanitary product size, depending on flow. Take your pick. I've never seen that anywhere before, elsewhere, outside.
I think a lot of the colleges at Cambridge do it.
And it's fantastic.
Yeah, it is.
And then it just made me reflect on all the times I've needed to, when I've been on shift and a woman needs some sanitary product, and I've just got to rake through cupboards and come back with some sort of nappy because we have nothing else. It's shameful. I just don't understand why when you lump it together, like we're so busy with our lives, with all the multiple tasks that we do, that maybe we don't have the time to sometimes stop and take stock. But I feel we're taking stock, and I'm pretty shocked when you put it all together like this. How do we improve going forwards?
I think that even within developing countries, there's a big difference in access to period products. And like kind of how you were saying, in America, there's this huge race class divide in access to all types of medical care, and I think that this is no different. I noticed when I moved to England, because I'm from the US, that period products are significantly cheaper even here, and this is the comparison between two developed countries.
I don't even think we should be paying for them. Why are we even paying for them, frankly?
What's the problem?
I don't understand why we even have to pay for them.
One thing I've noticed is that period shame isn't the same for younger women as it was for older women. In my day, you would do anything for nobody to know that you were on your period, whereas now for my daughter who's 15 and for her friends, they don't care.
Yeah,
of course I'm on my period. It's open and it's transparent, and I think that first collective raising, that consciousness raising is really important, I think.
Ramisa, I've got to think, medical school story. When we did neurosurgery, neurology, I remember one consultant saying, actually, we're just all walking brains, and maybe one day we'll evolve to a world where there'll just be tables and rows of, the rest of our bodies is just all geared up to keeping this organ going. So, that planted a seed in my head of some sort of futuristic row of brains linked up to machines and, the rest of this is just useless. Now you've got me thinking, a room full of wombs, and are we moving to a world where the rest of us won't, that it's quite creepy actually that they're trying to create, I think, frankly, maybe I'm just a bit old school, but, there are plans afoot of developing external wombs. Yes, I understand not everyone is blessed with the ability to reproduce and have children if that's their choice. But is that the only reason that's being developed?
I think that part of the theory was that it was meant to be radical, and the point that it was trying to make essentially is that they want to create a disconnect between a woman's body and the pressure of reproduction for both fertile and infertile women. And I think that it was more of like a shock value type of example. And I also think that a lot of these kind of techno-feminist answers to feminist issues aren't sustainable at all, and that any, I guess, type of technological revolution type of answer to any issues that we have right now without accounting for environmental issues, social and economic issues, cultural issues is, I think, not the correct answer. So I think that in this case, at least, that it's more important that we kind of destroy the stigma and the, I guess, like the cultural pressures of either having or not having children, the kind of stigma around periods, and rather than trying to eliminate these things totally or completely disconnect them from womanhood, it's better to have a social, cultural shift instead of a technological shift.
And you mentioned the discussion about, you know, around the issue of motherhood being unique to women, and that being a whole discussion. Well, you know, does that fall into that, removing the pressure of motherhood and pregnancy from women? Is that part of that discussion?
I think so, yeah. And I think that, like, one thing that I kind of mentioned is that, like, I think that it's important to kind of open up this, I guess, like, term of womanhood and who is a woman. And that's something that's discussed in feminist political thought a lot, is that how do we define women and who gets included in that? And there's tons of streams of theories, but...
And again, the concept of refraining from motherhood for whatever reason, by choice, could be seen as a form of protest.
Yeah, I think that I personally think is, like, perfectly fine, but I think that the part that is really radical is saying that the only way forward for all women is that if everyone agrees to this, which I think is excluding a whole nother group of women who want to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's where there's a kind of disconnect in the theory between different perspectives.
I do have to bring in a bit of COVID because, you know, I know we've moved on to World War III, but COVID was our last and still slightly present challenge. Pregnancy during COVID, you know, I had my sister was pregnant during COVID, and she's a paediatrician, and we didn't even know what to do, which way to jump, vaccine or not vaccine. I felt that the information was pretty slim on the ground, and yet you were hearing, I think some of the biggest early stories were about women who were in advanced pregnancy having the most horrific complications, and needing the most extreme medical interventions, and I don't even think that they pulled through. We were let down, weren't we?
Yeah.
By that.
It's really interesting what's happened with research around women and COVID and long COVID. And obviously, you know, when you're pregnant, you're filled with estrogen, so your immune system is up there punching. So actually, you're more likely, I think, to protect yourself. One of the interesting things that's come out, and there's been more and more conversation about it, and we were trying to have this conversation, doctors were trying to have it 2 years ago, which is that women on the pill and on HRT were much less likely to get COVID and to get long COVID. And women
to get COVID at all?
Yeah, no, sorry, to die from COVID. And women on HRT were much less likely to die from COVID because, again, the estrogen being pumped up protects the immune system. And there's been all these studies on long COVID, and they're only coming around to the question of why are women suffering long COVID far more than men? And a lot of them are in the 40 to 50, that kind of age group. And it turns out that if in experiments that Dr. Louise Newson is doing, who's the biggest menopause specialist in Britain, and she's bringing in women with long COVID, and she's giving them estrogen and, if necessary, progesterone and testosterone, and it's getting rid of all that fatigue, lethargy, stiff joints, all that, because COVID goes into your ovaries. It goes into, it goes into the brain, it goes into your nose, and we know it does this sort of crazy thing depending on which variant you have. And COVID was truly affecting people's ovaries and their periods, and yet did we pay enough attention to that? No, it was just women moaning about having periods at the wrong time, and actually it was having this profound effect. And the science waited for 2 years, and it left women out there having long COVID for 2 years. And frankly, they could have gone to their GP and got a bit of HRT or the pill, and it might really have helped them move on from that really grim, sort of sluggish, difficult period in their lives. But again, it was just like, put up with it.
I think, just to add quickly, I think the paucity of public health advice around COVID was a political decision. And I think that political decisions are very informed by who has control in politics. And of course, there aren't nearly enough women in politics. So and we know that the issues that matter to women as a result are not being discussed. So I think that you need to look at these issues around the cause of that, the gender segregation, move into Parliament, get these issues discussed, move into criminal justice. The reason why hardly any rape prosecutions are because there are not enough women making decisions in those areas of law. So I'd say I think you need to back out in terms of COVID and think who's making the decisions around this, and it's around.
I mean, it's interesting. They said, in the US, the deaths during pregnancy or shortly after spiked in the pandemic's first year, especially amongst Black and Hispanic women, and that's what a current report said. But I could go on forever because this is so fascinating. But I'm being greedy. Questions, please. Yeah, wait until the mic comes.
Yes, I had a question about your point, Kate, about the women who reach a point in their career where they could potentially be staying much longer and they have this brain dip. At what point do you think employers might get behind sponsoring HRT for their female employees and potentially lobbying politicians to support this for the productivity of a nation? Because I feel like a lot of the time in this capitalist society, it is more about profit and making money. And if you increase the number of years your employees are productive for, that could also be a good incentive. I'm keen to hear what you think.
I think that's a smart and practical suggestion, is that if employers realise we can, if the NHS really put its mind to this, it would, help women go to clinics and help women deal with their symptoms, and then help retention of the women working in the NHS. I mean, all these big companies all have menopause policies now, all the big banks, they've all been seen to do it. But what's interesting was I was speaking to a woman who's sort of runs AXA insurance here in Britain, and I was talking to her about companies taking on adding a menopause policy to their private health offering to women. And it's been massively taken up. And the companies using the Balance Menopause app, which take you through your symptoms and explain what's happening to you, and you fill in, and then they get that app free for their company, and they tend to retain more women workers. So it's an absolute no-brainer economically in terms of long-term health, in terms of helping women. And it's not just, some women can't take HRT, like the 1 in 7 that get breast cancer, which is a whole other issue of why 1 in 7 women are getting breast cancer. But there are a couple of new preparations coming out that will bring estrogen back to the brain, but not the breast. And they're called SERMs, phyto-SERMs. And tamoxifen, the famous breast cancer drug, blocks the estrogen in your breast, but it doesn't block it in your brain. And so there will be things like that, or in these sort of SERMs, that will probably be able to give women back the estrogen they need in their brain. Are we racing to study that? Not much, but we are in America. In America, they're doing some really amazing work on this. So there is hope, but I think also we've got to accept that our brains are going to change. It's a really interesting bit of women's lives, just like pregnancy is, that your brain utterly reboots in pregnancy so you can hold a baby, catch a bottle, drive a car, all these kind of awful things you have to do all at once, and do your work at the same time.
We really should be ruling the world, I'm sorry. We really should.
And your brain reboots in menopause to do something else. What is it rebooting? Why is it pumping more blood to the brain after menopause? Why has your white matter gone down? Because you can't be bothered thinking about that. Maybe you're just going up with your grey matter. I mean, who knows? Nobody's really studied it. But, in literature, in life, those older women that are leaders, that are powerful, like, as I was saying, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, what a brain. And it kept going, what drove her? What drives all those older women, that are great scientists and things like that? So, there's this incredible, hopeful thing that we're looking at. I mean, I think my patch is kind of, it's great. We can do these things if we ask for them. And these, there are things out there to help us, and there are drugs out there to help us. And we need to take it to a much wider world.
Can I just ask them very, very quickly, sorry, one more. Risk.
breast cancer risk.
Yeah, are
You're
women,
a doctor, so what were you taught?
Well, do you know, yeah, exactly. So I don't remember much from my lessons, but I absolutely distinctly remember the lecture where I was sitting down and I wrote down HRT, risks, breast cancer, ovarian cancer, and then I thought, crikey, those are really difficult choices for women to make. Mm-hmm. Do you want not to have hot flushes and all the rest of it versus breast cancer? And it was never explained that well. It was, I think, a 1 hour lecture, and it was in my notes, and then I logged it and then moved on.
Yeah.
And so I've always carried that, and I'm moving into that state. The other day, I was feeling a little bit stiff and a bit like, oh, what's going on? And I sent a message to Dorothy going, is this pre-menopausal? Am I getting menopausal now? She's like, no, I think it's probably COVID. So, but and then I started to, go back into the archives about HRT.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm trying to dig back.
I can do it in 1 minute.
Go for it.
All the big studies were in 2002, the Women's Health Initiative, biggest ever study, 16,000 women. They were on the old HRT, which was progestin, synthetic progestin, a chemical progestin, which is not a copy of your own hormone, and an estrogen made out of horse's urine.
Oh.
Now, the choice, that's what all the theories are based on, right? What I'm on is, the new HRT, body identical, made from yams, a copy of my own hormone, which doesn't show
I want that one.
stuff. But basically, they get in that study. Here's shocking, sexist, stupid science, right? In that study, the average age they gave the women the HRT, the 16,000, was age 63, because they wanted them not to show any menopausal symptoms, and because giving anyone HRT stops their hot flushes like that, usually, they would immediately know that they were on the placebo if it didn't work. So there was the idea of a randomized controlled trial. You had to get older women who were past menopause, who were past that window of opportunity, and whose estrogen receptors had been, open like flowers, but by the time they were 63, had shut. And they were pumping in huge tons of mare's estrogen into these women with their little shot receptors. And some of them had heart attacks.
Oh, gosh.
And a lot of them had breast cancer because progestin can be a catalyst for the breast cancer, right? Whereas progesterone is not. And, the idea that we base what you learned at medical school on that incredibly flawed study. By the way, 70% of the women were obese, and obesity is a huge problem for breast cancer, and lots of them were smokers. So what exactly that proved? It proved it was not a good idea to give older women who were obese, who were at risk, a ton of a hormone which was synthetic. It didn't prove anything about what's happening to us today, but it's lying there like this huge stone on top of us.
Time to refresh. Yes.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This is really interesting and shockingly relatable, either through my experience or my mother's, my grandfather's.
Can I ask, just because it's going to be brilliant, can you just introduce yourself and tell us what you do? And
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea. I'm an Ahsan graduate. My family work in education. Thank you so much. Again, I found this really interesting and shockingly relatable, again, through my experience. And then I could recognize things about my mum, my grandmother, friends, and so on. And I guess this is probably something that we all have here. We could all relate to different bits. And one thing is, when my mum went through menopause, my dad was going crazy because he didn't know what was happening to her. And he came to me, and I didn't know. And I didn't know that she was going through that, and I didn't know how to help him. So my question is in two parts. First of all, what's your experience on getting men, leaders, male leaders, fathers, brothers, and so on, to be activists and campaigners for this? And also, what is your advice here? Because sometimes I'm faced, I'm not a big person that goes out with flags and so on, but I try as much as I can to do that type of campaign work in my personal life. So I was just wondering, again, what's your experience with getting men onto our side, let's say, and also, and for them to put the money where our needs are, because I think there's a big problem, right, in funding that type of research. So it's all about, getting people to understand this, but also to put the money into this type of research.
I mean, it would be in their best interest too, really, wouldn't it?
Male allies, once they hear what we're saying, particularly at work, They really understand, and they want things to work, and they want their colleagues to be happy, and they want it all to function. So there is a really positive kind of force. But I don't think that is coming from the top in research. And it's not really men, it's the men that run the huge pharmaceutical companies. And research is funded by, the big pharmaceutical companies. Hormones are a natural product. You can't patent them unless you mix them up with something else and put them in a purple cream. But if you keep the hormones separate, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, they are natural products, and you are not going to make any money selling that to people in the way that, Prempro, the horse's urine and the chemicals, that's still in patent. That's going to be in patent forever because it's such a wonderful, potion. And we've talked about, and lots of doctors have campaigned to get the good hormones that we're on researched much better. So we've got much better data. Nobody's interested.
I won't, I've got others, but I'll put it out to the floor. Yes. So just if you put your hands up, then I know exactly who we've got one there, one there, and one at the back there. Okay, so if you go first. Yeah.
All right. I'm Tessa Killington Shaw. I'm actually chair of the Alumni Society, and I graduated in 1973. And you will hate to hear this. I wasn't even aware of my menopause. My concern is, what do we do at the very beginning? My daughter is 33 next week. When she was small, I could go to a shop and I could choose clothes, pink, blue, purple, anything. Now, she's expecting another baby. Well, she's expecting a baby next week. She's got a 3-year-old. If I go to a shop, it's boys' clothes, girls' clothes. They're being indoctrinated at that age. She's indoctrinated by me and has tried very hard to be sort of, gender neutral is the wrong thing, but your horizons are curtailed if you're seen as, I'm a little pretty princess in my nice pink dress and she's tried desperately hard to ensure that her daughter isn't like that. At 3, and she's in Hong Kong and she's not exposed to media, she's still picked up on it. She chooses her clothes. She now wears purple and pink. But the point is, it's how people then react to her. And that means, oh, you're a little princess, so you can't make decisions. And what I'm concerned is that actually through media, through social media, through the big companies, people's choices at that age are being curtailed. And when they get to our age, they're not going to be in the position to choose or to actually fight as you're exhorting us to do. That's my concern.
What do you think, Sarah? Because you're very, your work is all about choice.
I'm pro-campaigning, as you can tell. Well, have you heard of Pink Stinks and Let Toys Be Toys? I mean, those are 2 wonderful campaigns that are doing exactly what you say. They're fighting to stop the big producers of toys and clothes from being gendered in that way. I think it has got worse in the last. I mean, has it got worse? I don't know. I'm always aware of it very much. In terms of my own daughter, I think it is easy to influence them yourselves. So I think that. What you do, what you say, what you go on to do. So not just what you talk about, but what you walk, the actual way you walk, the way you campaign is very important, I think. I think that if that's in people's context at the beginning of life, then they often come back to that as well. So even if there are sort of faddish changes at the beginning and friends are doing whatever, then they retain that understanding of what you've talked about. They retain the understanding of feminism. For me, the critical thing that I've always said to her is that it is difficult being a woman, and you will find it's difficult being a woman, and it's difficult not because of you. There are outside forces that make it difficult to be a woman, and these are what they are, and I explained that. And then there is also solidarity in that. So, find other people who have those same challenges that you do, and connect with them and talk about it and do something to change it. So I think that's what you've got to do. You've got to campaign, and there are lots and lots of conversations that you can have.
Ramisa, I want to, you're studying, this is your area, specialism, gender and feminism. Can you give me your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely been a push recently to try to kind of I guess create this shift, but I think that obviously in a lot of places and in a lot of ways it hasn't really been that successful. And I think that there does need to be a lot more campaigning and a lot more.
Who are we fighting against for this change? I know we've stepped out of health, but what are the barriers to this thought process?
I think a lot of the barriers are genuinely just cultural things, because as we can see kind of from your example, that even when we actively try to kind of correct this, it's something that kind of seeps back into your life. And so I think that it's a very slow and gradual change that's going to happen. And I think that there's a lot of young parents who are like not doing gender reveals, or they're trying to do like gender neutral toys. And I think that there's a big, I think the fact that there is a big money-making market there is going to help the process, because obviously that's like economically the things that are fruitful.
Well, you're right. If it becomes a financially viable thing, it's probably going to succeed,
and
isn't
I think
it?
that there's a lot of companies and big department stores like in America, like Walmart and Target, that are trying to capitalize off this. And I think that it's something that because it's something that you can capitalize off of monetarily, that it's going to be something that picks up a lot more in the next couple of years.
Okay, so yourself? Yep.
Hello. My name's Helen, and I did physical natural sciences, and I'm now a software engineer. So I want to say, firstly, thank you. I feel like I've learned so much from this panel, and that's kind of where my question is coming from, is that there is an extreme lack of education on these topics. My experience at school, I didn't learn anything about menopause. You're also taught to just innately trust the doctors. So like what you're saying about the sexism within medicine, that's not even a concept you would even consider being possible, because you're just taught to trust the medical field. We're not taught about menopause. I only really heard about HRT for menopause maybe a couple of weeks ago and today. So I think if we want to empower women, we have to start from education. And I wanted to know from Kate and Sarah, my first question is, within your campaigns, are there plans to get this into the curriculum? Because I think children need to be taught about this at a young age. And then for Ramisa, I was interested to know about, have you studied anything between like feminism and the opinion of surrogacy? Because obviously that's pregnancy by choice, but you're also, it's like I don't know if it's a career, but it's something you can make money from.
You've just made me have flashbacks to the tampon lady that we had that came to school. That was that one, for an hour to teach us how to put tampons in. That was our sort of period lesson. And that was it. I didn't even know that there was other stuff you could use. Yes.
I could do it quickly. Menopause is not taught in biology yet, in like GCSE biology. So your periods start, but as far as you know, they go on forever, But it is taught in PHSE or whatever that is now called, and they've put that in, but there's, I think, just like one line or two. So basically, you're not going to find out about any of this, or indeed the effects of, long-term hormonal deprivation would have on the body. So yeah, we really need to campaign, and there has been a bill to change the PHSE, but not the biology yet, because why bother?
I mean, of course, there was a recent law change, so sex education is mandatory now, and that was a huge move forward, I think. And I mean, assisted dying is covered in PHSE as well, under the sort of the ethical debate on it. We try and do organise sessions for medical students around assisted dying issues and choice at the end of life. And we actually get the people who are affected by these issues, the family members who've been involved in taking family members to Switzerland, or who've even unfortunately had to accelerate a loved one's death with their consent, to talk to medical students about the kinds of issues that they're going through. But, I think it will come, but at the moment, I'm concerned with lobbying Parliament and getting a law change through, but it needs to be there. Thank you, great question.
Ramisa.
Yeah, just to quickly answer the question about surrogacy, I think on one hand, in the literature, it's seen as something that is really empowering and something that is a great way for women who maybe wouldn't be able to have kids otherwise to have their own kids. And I think on the other hand, the kind of like radical techno-feminists would say that it's just an extension of the kind of pressure that's put on women to have biologically related children, and that their kind of end goal is to have there be no link between womanhood and biological offspring or reproduction. So I think that those are the kind of two schools of thought on that. But I think that there's definitely a lot of in between, though. So yeah.
I think we have now come to the end. Such an incredible conversation, and I'm sure that we'll have plenty of opportunities to speak as the day progresses. But I just want to ask you all to help me thank Ramisa, Kate and Sarah for their incredible insights into these very important areas. So thank you very much.